This is Joseph S. Samaniego. I'm the author of the Carolingian Age fantasy book series, and you can find my books on Amazon and also my website, joseph-samaniego.com. The newest one, Fate Kings and Queens, is out now and ready to be read. And to that end, let's talk about knights and men-at-arms, who you will find in a lot of my books. So what is a man-at-arms? A man-at-arms is a professionally trained soldier, much like a knight, whose job exists only to fight and is basically the hired bodyguard, champion, soldier, however you want to describe it, of the local lord. These were men whose sole job was to fight and defend the land or attack others. So, being said all of that, is a knight a man-at-arms? Yes, typically. Is a man-at-arms a knight? No, not always. The same with mercenaries. Men-at-arms were often used in mercenaries, but not all men-at-arms were mercenaries. Not in the traditional sense of a wandering soldier fighting, basically soldier for hire. A lot of these were hired and trained by the lord specifically to only live at this particular land and fight for that particular lord and land. So as you can see from the examples I have here, men-at-arms were predominantly, that terminology was used really in the high medieval period, looking at almost getting into the Renaissance. This was mostly a continental and English aspect, so continental, German, French. There was others though as well that you would see. In Italy, they called them something else. They were a different style fighter, and they were very common in Italy as well. And we'll look at the Byzantine, kind of the Byzantine version of it in a little bit. But the English men-at-arms that are pictured here, and then I want to say the one on horseback is actually a German, based on the helmet. They're very well armed. Typically, a man-at-arms would have multiple weapons. They won't have that many. They're just showing you different examples. Well, if a single-handed sword, double-handed sword, and a hand-and-a-half sword, sometimes called a bastard sword. But they also have warhammer, mace. Here he has a poleaxe. Now, the warhammer and mace were not used early by knights simply because they were not looked at as being noble weapons. They were looked at as being commoner weapons, same as a bow and arrow or even a crossbow, even though those did take training. The idea of a knight was sword or lance, something that you had to approach your enemy with, whereas bow and arrow or crossbow you could do from far away. Axe and warhammers and maces, you still have to approach them, but they were looked at as more commoner tools. That changed around the 100 Years of War when the idea of using professional soldiers and really paying your soldiers as opposed to bringing in levies was really increased. You already had that idea in a lot of cases. I mean, we have the Anglo-Saxon housecarls. Even the Normans had it. Vikings obviously had it. And as I said, the Byzantines had their own version of the Varangian Guard. But the idea in the 100 Years' War that expanded that was the need for more soldiers. And so it really became a necessity to have experienced, trained professionals. And to do that, you had to have money, you had to have gold. And you can see here, he's armored in plate armor, which is expensive. It was time consuming to make, and it cost money to forge a lot of that. Even in chainmail and brigadines, they cost money. Depending on the amount of labor that went into it and the amount of material that went into it, obviously the more gold, silver would go into it. So here you have these guys who are worth their weight, literally, in gold just for their fighting skills. But let's take a look at where this kind of began, because men-at-arms, as I said, was more of a later term, an idea after the age of chivalry had kind of gone by the wayside. But the essence of the men-at-arms was always there. So let's take a look at some of the other examples. So as I mentioned, in the Anglo-Saxon tradition, you had housecarls, which you can see there, the three gentlemen with the axes and spears and the big kite shields on the back. They could have also had rounded shields. They're wearing the chainmail hauberk, and that was basically a large chainmail shirt that would almost be like a gown in some sense. And these were professional soldiers who were hired by the Anglo-Saxon lords, and typically they were from the same area as the Anglo-Saxon as the lord, and they were hired on. Sometimes their fathers were from, they were also the housecarls, or their family had a long tradition of that. And this was actually brought over from the Vikings. The Vikings did it as well. And you got to remember too, it's the Anglo Saxons were from the Saxons, who were Germanic. There was some similarities between the Norse and the Saxons to begin with. And so when you have the Anglo Saxons here, again, you have a lot of that similarity. The Normans, who again were from the Norse culture originally, that were assimilated into the French, utilize the same somewhat armor and tactics and weaponry. They didn't really use the axe as much, but here you see the lance being used, the chainmail, the long chainmail, like the nasal helm with the conical head on top, and the kite shields with swords, and that was a very common sight throughout the 11th century, especially if you go down into Sicily. The Normans conquered Sicily, and like they were really actually the kings of Sicily for dukes and kings of Sicily for a couple hundred years there, and had a lot of connections and with the Mediterranean. So there is some similarities there to the men at arms, because these knights, the Norman knights, were highly sought after, just like the housecarls, for being very aggressive, being great soldiers, and they really did make some good mercenaries. Especially the Sicilian branch of the Normans were extremely successful with war and fighting. So what we're going to see now is the Byzantine aspect of this, because as I mentioned, with the Byzantines, you do get a different set of knights. So here we have the Varangian Guard, and these were the Vikings and Norse who did not go west towards England and towards Ireland and France. These are the ones that actually went through the Volga to the Black Sea and interacted with the Byzantines, but also were prominent in helping start Kievan Rus, which is where now Ukraine is. So these were hired soldiers. They had been attacking the Byzantine Empire for a while, and the Byzantine emperor just finally said, "Hey, can I just hire you? I got problems of my own. People want to usurp me. Can I just hire you on instead of you attacking me? I'll give you the gold." So they did. And as you can see, they were very well armed. Again, just a common aspect of a professional soldier was well armed, well armored, and very skilled. That's what these were. And this is what you would see with this particular guard. They were similar to the old Roman style of having the guard for the emperor specifically. And this is what that is. Very strong armor, either very large chain, plate. Here you see more or less like a coat of many plates, the large shield, large axes, conical helms again. Because conical helms, actually, if you get hit in the head, and it can easily deflect a lot better. So again, this is what you would see. It's very similar to the Norman Knights, very similar to the housecarls, but this is what you would see with the Byzantine Empire and their version of what we would think of as men at arms, because these are your professional soldiers. And so there you have it. The men at arms, a little bit of brief history through the men at arms and what you could see throughout the continental Europe during the Middle Ages. Thanks for watching, and take care. Hope to see you soon.